I was delirious from blood loss when I reached the cemetery. My death was gone, and it was just me, stumbling through the gate and down the rows of gravestones. I couldn't remember when she left me. My memory was growing hazy. Blood soaked my shirt and my khakis and was running down my leg, leaving a thin trail behind me in the dirt. I kept pressure on the wound with one hand, but I had no idea if it was helping and just how much blood I'd lost. I didn't even know how deep the wound was. It hurt. It took my breath away with every movement. My death had taken me through the woods faster than I'd thought possible. We outran the beast, hand in hand, with it crashing through the woods behind me. It snapped branches and toppled trees as it pursued us, howling its rage. Its victory was close at hand. It could taste its triumph. It smelled my blood in the air. I'd at least had the presence of mind to keep tight hold of the mason jar as we ran. I still had the key, and I'd managed to sheath my knife back at my waist before fleeing. The logical, reasonable part of my mind whispered that I was safe here. The cemetery was a sacred place after all, drenched with the blood of all my family members that died. All those sacrifices, resting here in this one place. The air was thick with it. I could sit down and catch my breath, call 911 on my cell phone and wait the beast out, survive, heal, and then figure out a plan. A reasonable, rational plan. One that involved weapons and strategy, and perhaps the old sheriff on a hill with a high-powered rifle. The old sheriff. My eyes flooded with tears as I fell to my knees before a particular headstone. He wanted to help me. If I'd known how, I would have let him. Neither of us would get that chance now. I leaned my forehead against my parents' gravestone. The stone was blessedly cool against my feverish skin. The beast was still coming. I could feel its approach. I lacked the confidence that the graveyard's boundaries would hold it back, for it was a creature born of my family's anger, and it belonged here as much as I did. The rules were changing, the boundaries were weakening. There was nowhere I was safe anymore. I opened the mason jar with trembling hands. It took a few attempts as my hands kept slipping, wet with my own blood. I shook the key out of the cotton it was swaddled in, and it rested on my palm. Such a tiny, delicate thing. One chance. I had only one chance to get this right. My parents' grave is decorated with engraved flowers. In the middle, between their names, is a rose. There is no particular significance of the decoration. It merely looks nice. But as I stared down on it, I thought I saw something else. An indentation at the exact center, like a keyhole. A keyhole barely a millimeter wide. I held the key between thumb and forefinger. My dominant hand was covered with sticky, and the key affixed itself to that. My entire body was shaking. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this. But what choice did I have? I had to fight through just as I'd fought through everything else. Where was the beast? Why hadn't it caught up to me yet? I pushed the key into the tiny indentation. There was a subtle snap as the key broke in two and the pieces fell somewhere into the dirt. I didn't see where they landed. For a moment I knelt there in utter despair, thinking that it would be best to just lay down and hope I fainted from blood loss before the beast arrived. I was wrong. My intuition had failed me, and now I'd broken the basement key and there wouldn't be another. The ground underneath me shifted. It felt soft. I quickly scrambled away from it, and no sooner had I moved to the side than it fell away, crumbling down into the darkness of the earth. Before me was a staircase. The steps were made of wood, like the old basement stairs I'd seen in other houses in the area. I couldn't see what lay at the bottom. At the edge of the graveyard came the crash of a fence shattering. I glanced up, startled, and saw the beast. Its paw rested on the boundary of the cemetery, the fence crushed beneath its bulk. It stared at me and then opened its mouth, revealing its teeth and that glow that emanated from its throat. It seemed brighter now, like a sun, burning inside its chest. It took another step, over the boundary and into the cemetery. There was nowhere else to go. I stumbled to my feet and threw myself into the basement. My feet slipped on the stairs and I clutched at the smooth earthen wall for balance. Behind me, a hot wind buffeted my back and the roar of the beast filled my ears. I ran, tumbling down the stairs, and I felt something close behind me, and I lost my balance and fell. There was an impact on my shoulder, pain shot down my arm, and then another flash of pain from my side. I don't remember much else of the fall. I just remember laying on my stomach with cold earth beneath me. For a long moment, I thought I'd just stay there forever. Wait until someone found me. Resolutely, I shoved that thought aside. Nonsense. There was no one that could find me. I'd die down here, alone, just as Matthias had died in the gray world, and no one except me found his body. I painfully shoved myself to my feet. The darkness in front of me was absolute. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The floor beneath me was packed earth and the walls were crumbling brick. Patches of moisture darkened the surface, like mold spreading through the stone. The air smelled damp and stale. I was shaking from the cold. The wall had collapsed in one corner. Beyond it lay a small tunnel, just tall enough to permit a person to walk through without stooping. A short person, my height, almost exactly. My stomach twisted with dread as I approached it. Its walls were smooth, packed earth. There was light coming from the tunnel. I switched off my flashlight so I could see it better. A faint glow, like that of a coal, like the throat of the beast. I hesitated, not yet willing to step over the crushed brick and into the tunnel. And before I could gather my resolve, I heard someone call my name. I turned. My mother and father stood behind me in the center of the basement. My knees went weak. They were exactly as I remembered. They stood side by side, holding hands. Why should I be so surprised? The basement was underneath their grave, after all. "You don't have to go any further," my father said. "You've already done so much." "It's not enough, though," I whispered. "It'll never be enough, Kate," my mother said gently. "Look at what happened to everyone that tried. Look at what happened to me." Her stomach was covered in blood. I hastily averted my eyes. I didn't want to see what the little girl had done to her. It was bad enough seeing it in my dream. "It's too late. The land is turning ancient." I felt guilty telling them this. Would they be disappointed in me for letting the land get to this point? "We always knew this would happen someday. Do you remember me telling you that we'd have to abandon the land when that happened?" My dad's voice was soothing. I stared at my feet, unwilling to meet his eyes. He had told me that someday the land would turn ancient, and we'd be unable to control it then. Our time as campground managers would be over, and we'd have to turn it over to the inhuman things, and the town would have to fend for itself at that point. As a child, I'd quietly accepted this, and as an adult I thought it was a distant future, one that I wouldn't have to deal with. I wouldn't be the one making the choices. I didn't think it'd be this hard. I didn't imagine that the outcome would be so dire. Maybe I should have ceded the land to the lady with extra eyes. I clenched my hand into a fist. It was hard to breathe, hard to think straight. "Kate," my dad said gently, "it's okay. You did your best. You did what you thought was right, but you can walk away now. You don't have to die for this land like we did. Just leave. Let the beast claim it. You can be free. You and Tyler can move far away from here. It'll be okay." "It won't be okay," I said, raising my head to look at them. They looked so serene, standing there hand in hand. "The town will suffer." "They will," my mother admitted. "Likely it'll become a ghost town as people die or are forced to leave. These things happen. You don't have to be the one responsible for saving them." "It's your choice," my dad said. "We love this land, but we also love you. Come with us. I'll give you answers," my mom promised. "I'll give you closure." They were offering me everything I ever wanted, in my darkest moments when I doubted myself. The ability to just walk away, to leave this responsibility behind, to abandon my family's legacy. But I loved this land. Perhaps it would lead to my destruction just as it had with my parents and everyone before me. But this was a choice I'd made countless times before, and this time would be no different. Besides, I had another obligation to fulfill. I felt it like a tug in my chest, a pull, drawing me towards the tunnel. I made a promise. "Now go," Bo had said, "and do not fail me." Just once I would do as he told me. Just once. I turned my back to them. I stepped into the tunnel. My mother called my name one last time and I hesitated, but I did not stop. I don't know if that was really them. We've never had ghosts or spirits on this land, but maybe it's because they're all trapped within the ice. Or because they're trapped here, in the basement. Or maybe it was just my own doubts, given form by the basement to test my resolve. I'll never know, because I turned away from them. I walked away. I walked away from the answers I so desperately wanted. I am my mother's daughter, and I love this land more than anything else. The tunnel carried me down into the earth, and the air gradually grew warmer. The moisture increased as well, cloying in my throat. I swayed with every step, and I was no longer trying to put pressure on the knife wound in my side. Maybe it had stopped bleeding by now. I didn't know. The only thing that mattered was that I kept going, one foot in front of the other. That was all I could do, keep going until I saw it through to the end. The light steadily grew until the tunnel opened up into a domed chamber. The heat was oppressive now. The humidity clung to my skin and beaded on my brow. The entire room was lit with a warm glow, like that of a campfire. Every surface was covered with a thick growth like vines, but the way they rippled and the lines marking their surface reminded me of muscles. They converged in the middle as the torso and head of the beast. The sound of its breathing filled the chamber and echoed in my ears. Its throat glowed with a fire inside, visible even beneath the skin. Its eyes were stars, staring down at me, and protruding from its chest was the little girl. She was no longer a girl. She'd grown. We were the same age, I thought. And it might have been blood loss, but it seemed that lights danced in my vision, wreathing her brow like a crown. Her arms were pulled back, trapped in the beast's chest, its black veins burrowing into her flesh. Her legs were similarly imprisoned, vanishing into the twisted mass of vine-like muscles from the waist down. Our eyes met. She stared at me in helpless desperation, waiting for me, for anyone. "You're the heart of this land," I whispered. "You said you had no mother because you were never born. It's because the land is not yet ancient, isn't it? You're not whole yet." I took a step towards her. The beast towered over its captive, waiting for me to walk within striking range. All around me the room rippled. The muscles of the beast stirred. I stumbled as the ground underneath me shifted. I stood there a moment, legs spread, trying to maintain my balance. The torso of the beast was stationary at least. I regarded it for a moment, trying to figure out my approach. I had my knife clutched in my hand. It felt like I couldn't let it go anymore as the blood stuck my fingers together and bound the hilt to my flesh. I could come up from behind it. If it was rooted in place, then I could get behind it and climb up its back until I was close enough to sink my knife into its neck from behind. My knife could cut through anything. It was made from the rib of my great aunt and bound with the muscles of her heart, a weapon forged from my family's defiance of death. Surely it would be enough to kill the beast. I picked my way across the uneven floor of the chamber. The beast's muscles twitched as I did, and a low growl emanated from its chest. The woman trapped there let out a single sob at the sound. I resolutely ignored her. I'd deal with her once the beast was out of the way. I'd come this far, and I had no intention of letting the beast or the little girl take this land away from me. I'd fight until my last breath, and if this was the way to ascension, to remaking myself into something else, then I'd go into that darkness, screaming my defiance to the last. It grew harder and harder the closer I got to the beast's back. It didn't try to turn and bite at me. Perhaps it knew it wouldn't be able to turn that far, but the muscles of its body began to feel mushy, like they were made of mud. It was difficult to pull my feet free of them, like it was trying to swallow me up like it had the little girl. I stabbed into the beast with my knife, using it to give myself purchase as I climbed up onto its back. The creature roared in pain and rage, so close it couldn't stop me. My anger was hot in my veins. This thing had killed my dad. Now it was my turn to take my revenge. I was on its back, clinging to the fibrous tendrils that ran down its spine. I held onto them for purchase as the beast shook back and forth, trying to fling me off. And then, when it twisted violently to one side, I used that motion to give momentum to the arm that held the knife. The blade bit deep into the side of its neck. I wrenched backwards, ripping through its oily flesh. Blood spilled out, dark crimson, and coated my arm. And there was an impact in my chest, just between the collarbones. A flash of pain. Blinding. My body went numb with the shock. I fell backwards and landed in the coils of the beast's muscles, sprawled across the floor like so many vines. I couldn't breathe from the pain, and it was like I was the one who had been stabbed. Slowly, the beast's anguish thrashing subsided. It grew still, its breathing as labored as mine, and beneath that, I heard the quiet weeping of the little girl. I picked myself up. The ground clutched at me, reluctant to let me go, and I felt like I was clawing my way out of sand. My arm ached, and I wondered if I'd landed on it badly and fractured the bone. But then I saw something out of the corner of my eye, the beast's blood coating my arm like rust. It was moving and it was forming veins, and there was a flash of pain like a pinprick, and I watched in horror as a thin bead of red blood formed where the beast's blood had pierced my skin. "No!" I cried. "No!" I clawed desperately at the black veins wrapped around my forearms. I scraped off skin, and still they remained, burrowing ever deeper into my muscles. My very bones ached with pain. I had a brief, wild thought that I could cut them out with the knife, but even I faltered at such a horrific act. I stumbled around to the front of the beast and stared up at its myriad of glittering eyes. In its chest, the woman trembled in her prison. Her head was bowed, her gaze averted, and her cheeks shone with tears. The beast made no move. It waited. It knew it only had to wait. It would consume me. Already the vines along the ground were wrapping around my ankles, eager, anxious. "What do I do?" I cried in desperation. The woman stirred. Her head jerked a fraction, but she still did not look at me. "You killed my mother," I sobbed. "You killed my aunt. Can't you, just this once? Save me." I was trying to help. Ascension is a death of sorts. Her words came with difficulty. She seemed confused. Like a child, I thought. A child that didn't know what was expected of them yet. She'd killed people I loved in her misguided attempts to save the land. But in that regard, was I any different? I stared up at the beast. Long ago, a little girl died right as the land turned old. It was an accident. Nothing more. But her family's helpless anger at a senseless tragedy created a beast, and we perpetuated that across generations. All of this was part of me. All of this made me who I am. My love for the land, my heart, a woman crowned with light, and my flaws, my anger, a monstrous beast burning beneath my skin. "I never wanted this," I whimpered. I wanted to protect myself, to be stronger than the creatures that hunted me, to be safe, to no longer feel the helpless anger of knowing there is nothing I can do. "You can't," she said, and it felt like her words were echoed in the beast's ragged breathing. "There are some things in life we cannot fight." I glanced down at the knife in my hand. My great-aunt fought the harvesters. She might have even killed a few, but in the end she died regardless. My only comfort was that she at least chose her time. Everything comes to an end, but it's not really about the ending. We all know how the stories will finish. The hero finds their way home, a bit different from after all they've endured, but we know they'll find what they're after in the end. What we care about is the journey, the struggle, the low points, the agony, and the fear of failure along the way. This is what we remember. There must be love, worship, fear, these things that make us last. Maybe my mother was trying to ascend and failed because she didn't have what I have, and maybe she wasn't. It doesn't really matter. Not to me. Not anymore. I felt resigned, empty. I'd fought for so long and come so far, and now, faced with a beast I could not kill, I only felt hollow inside. Like all of this was a foregone conclusion, and all that was left was to go through the motions. I'd thought I'd come here and find the heart, and use it to destroy the beast. But how can I destroy something that is a part of me? It too had a role in this. People don't always change. This is who I was. I was tired, I was in pain, and I wasn't ready to die. Not yet, not ever. But I've long since learned that courage doesn't require accepting one's fate. It just requires a moment, a few brief seconds, in which you discard the consequences and do what you know needs to be done. This is the last thing I did as a human, the last sacrifice my family would make. I ran to the woman. I threw my arms around her neck and held her tight to me, chest to chest, cheek to cheek. I embraced her with arms that were the color of rust, corroded with the beast's blood. I clung to the heart of this land, my death. I held tight to her and felt her trembling go still, and her weeping stopped, and finally, neither of us were afraid or alone. And the beast lunged as I did this, dipping its head, and it bit through us both, its teeth puncturing skin and bone and the muscles of the heart. Dying isn't as hard as they make it seem. After a lifetime of fighting, it was like laying down to take a long, desperately needed rest. I heard a great roaring wind. It filled my ears, and it was like there was a pressure inside me, like I was being filled with the wind, and it sounded like the cry of a beast. Until that was all I knew, and it carried me away. Underneath this land is a chamber, a basement. It is a place that is neither of this world nor entirely of the inhuman world. There is a cell phone sitting in the dirt that will eventually run out of battery charge and rust. Nothing else was left behind. I walked away, out of the earth and into the light of the campground. Ancient land, my land. I crowned myself with a wreath of branches, and they bloomed with light when they touched my brow. I returned to the place where Beau's body lay. I knelt by his side. In my hands was a cup, fashioned from the skull I had taken from the coffin of a woman that had once been my mother. Beau was not able to see the future. He saw patterns and possibilities, and when I refilled his cup as a human, he saw potential. A slim chance, but one that he decided to take. He wanted so much more than a name. I see this now. Inhuman things do not die as humans do. They diminish, they are forgotten, and then they disappear. I removed the shard of bone from his heart, and then I took the cup and poured into his mouth the last of my mortal blood, taken from where it had been spilled onto the ground. He is not forgotten yet, perhaps he never will be. He sat up. I placed the cup in his hands. "Don't break this one," I said firmly. "You're not getting another." He stared up at me. "She did as I asked," he said. "She did," I confirmed. "Will you miss her?" "I think so, but I'm glad to finally meet you." I stood and held out a hand to pull him to his feet. We regarded each other a moment, assessing what we saw as if this was our first time meeting. In a way, it was. "Will you still yell at people who leave their trash behind like she did?" he asked. "Probably." I pressed a hand against my chest where a fire still burned inside. "I might even let the beast out to hunt. Will you still rip the blood out of people who double park? If you permit it?" I smiled, a thin smile, one that he echoed. "I'll consider it," I promised. He glanced down into his cup. "You used only one kind of blood," he said, staring at the liquid inside. "Blood freely given." "I did. You're different now." I didn't ask him if he liked the changes. We are inhuman things, and we do not have the will to change ourselves. We simply are. When I walked away, he followed me, by my side, but a single step behind. He carried his cup in both hands, and his expression showed no emotion, save for a slight, thin smile at the corner of his lips. He is still bound to me. He shall persist for as long as I do. And we ancient things cannot pass from memory so easily. This isn't a grand story of all-engulfing evil and noble struggle and heroes and gods. It is a tiny speck of land, ignored by the world at large. A few hundred acres, stretching in a row down a long hill. There's a barn and some houses, a cemetery. It is the lifeblood of a small community. It is the nexus of these inhuman currents of our world in this area. But we are such a small part of a greater whole. Every one of you would have likely lived and died, and your descendants and their descendants would have as well, without ever knowing it existed, had I not told you about this place and what has happened here. It is my home, and it is my story, how I lived and how I died. I'm sitting now at the desk that used to be so familiar, writing this for all of you, something I have done without fail for the past 2 years. I looked forward to it. I enjoyed reading what you said and knowing I wasn't alone in all of this. That sensation is fading. I feel like a stranger in this place. My connection with this house will vanish. I am a creature of the deep woods. I may go where I will, but this place holds no particular meaning to me now. My brother lives here in my stead, or at least, he will. I've seen him come and go carrying boxes both in and out of the house. I watch him from the edge of the woods. I think he has seen me as well, but he continues with his work. There is still much to be done. Like her parents, Kate left behind a life unfinished. I feel moments of regret for this, but they pass quickly. Soon I will not feel them at all. As I write this last story, I see that my once brother is changing the list of rules. He's removed the minor, petty ones that I have chosen to deal with. Others, like the visitor and the harvesters and the dancers, I have permitted to remain. Though I admit I had some words with the harvesters about their methods. The shepherd has finally been able to leave the campground of his own will, though he still comes by from time to time. I expect the thing in the dark will do the same someday, and so its lair is still reserved for its return. The man with the skull cups rule is still on the list, of course, but it's been modified. Rule number 2. If you meet a man carrying a skull cup, he is the cupbearer for the one that rules over this land. His name is Bo. He will offer you a drink, which you may refuse with no consequence. If you drink, you will never be able to eat mortal food ever again, but nor will you need to. Choose wisely. He's also adding a new rule. It is the first rule on the list. Rule number 1. If you meet a woman with a crown of branches, she will offer to tell you a story. Listen to it, and you will be under her protection, and no harm will ever befall you while you're on these grounds. I like this rule. I used to be a campground manager. Now I am the Lady of Stories. I wear a crown of branches, and I carry a knife of bone, and the residents of this land bow when I pass by. Come visit us. Come find me and listen to what I have to say. I have many stories to tell. Stories to tell. Stories to tell.